We've officially reached the All-Star break, and this Mets team currently sits in a very weird spot. There's no sense of direction right now, but that's kind of the price we all pay for rooting for a team and a franchise known for psychedelic torture. Episode 24 of the Mets Weekly Podcast, 60 Minutes of Brutal Honesty, begins right now. All right, so for those of you who have not already, make sure to subscribe to the Mets Weekly channel, turn on post notifications for content throughout the week, follow us on Twitter, TikTok, including all of our individual links that are in the description. So, halfway through the year, how are we feeling, Frank?
It was a tough week because you got to see what the Mets are capable of when they're doing good things. When you actually get good starting pitching, guys going 8 innings, you're getting quality offense, your big-time stars that you're paying big money for, like Francisco Lindor, getting the job done. And then in the San Diego series, you see the bad side of the Mets, where guys like Max Scherzer, who are getting paid a lot of money, not getting the job done. Poor starting pitching performances, not going your 8 innings. And then you see not as good offense as you did in Arizona, with guys leaving so many men on base and not coming through, only scoring a couple runs here or there, not going to get it done. So you're feeling good with the 6-game win streak that, maybe they're starting to turn the corner. Maybe they could kind of close a little bit of ground, go into the All-Star break with some momentum, and then try to make a second half push. But then those last 2 games, and it gives you a very bad flashback when the Mets season ended last year with Joe Musgrove shutting them down. And then the first half of the season ends with Joe Musgrove shutting them down. So it's like we've been saying all along, you ran back the same team. You don't see improvement from last season. And that's a big concern. And there's obviously, that goes without saying. When you are a team that, you had your over 100 wins and you're in first place for so long, this year, you're plenty of games under 500. You're trying to fight for your life to get even in the wild card race. You could see that contrast, but still a lot of the same flaws that they had last year. And that definitely still shows now.
Yeah, I found this week a little bit more frustrating than actually exciting, because we knew what, at their best, this Mets team is capable of. And even though we are very critical out of how this roster is constructed and how they brought back the same team, like you just said, we all knew that this team was capable of being better than they obviously are at this point in the first half. We did not expect them to be multiple games under 500, pretty much completely out of the NL East at this point, and pretty much fighting out of a very deep hole in the National League wild card race. I mean, I am not surprised that they're worse than they were at this point last year, but it's just been a very draining chore to watch this team throughout the first 80 plus games. And I'm hoping that it does turn around in the second half. But as we all know, in these next few weeks, it's going to decide the future of what goes on for the rest of the week, with the trade deadline looming away. And we're obviously going to cover a lot of that towards the end of this episode. So let's just get into the Mets West Coast trip. Now, as for something that we have not said in a while, the Mets actually played positive baseball on the West Coast this week. On Tuesday, the Mets began the road in Arizona with Max Scherzer on the mound, fighting through 6 innings and allowing 4 earned runs. But the Mets offense answered the call: a 3-run homer by Starling Marte in the 4th, a solo shot by Brandon Nimmo in the 5th, and a lead-sticking 2-run home run by the breakout kid Francisco Alvarez to lead the Mets to an 8-5 victory in Game 1. On Wednesday, Kodai Senga was brilliant. 8 innings of 1-run ball with a dozen strikeouts, but the Mets offense stayed silent for 8 innings. But in the 9th, Francisco Alvarez tied the game on one swing, with the Mets down to their final strike, homering for the 2nd straight day. And it was followed by a go-ahead RBI triple by Mark Canha to lead the Mets to a 2-1 Game 2 victory. On Thursday, Carlos Carrasco was the best he has been all season, with 8 scoreless innings on 96 pitches. Francisco Lindor had a huge day, going 5 for 5, falling a double short of the cycle and slugging 2 triples. Oh yeah, and Francisco Alvarez, that kid, he homered again in a 3rd straight day to lead the Mets to a 9-0 laugher and a sweep of Arizona. On Friday, The Mets would visit the Padres for a 3-game set with Justin Verlander on the mound for the opener. Verlander would shove through 6 innings of 3-run ball with 2 earned. Francisco Lindor would smash his 19th home run of the season to get the Mets within a run in the third, and an RBI infield single by Daniel Vogelbach to tie the game at 3 in the fifth. The pitching would take over from there into extra innings, where a slumping Jeff McNeil would deliver a go-ahead RBI double, scoring the ghost runner, and the Mets would pile it on from there. Francisco Alvarez would notch his 4th hit of the game, leading the Mets to an eventual 7-5 win in the opener to bring the winning streak to 6. On Saturday, Blake Snell would full-on carve up the Mets offense through 6 innings against a quality outing by David Peterson. Francisco Alvarez would homer once again, but that was all the Mets could produce in Game 2, snapping their win streak with a 3-1 loss. And yesterday, in the series finale, Max Scherzer took the mound and got roughed up for 5 earned runs in 5 innings pitched and 100 pitches. But the Mets would fight back in the 8th, cutting the lead to 6-2 on a Mark Canha RBI double, but that was all they could pretty much muster. The Mets go into the All-Star break sitting at 42-48 and 7 games back for the last NL wildcard spot.
The highlight of the week for me, being the big Francisco Alvarez fan, seeing him get back on track. I mean, obviously we've seen him start the season off. It was a little slow. He definitely was struggling, had to make those adjustments. Then he got red hot, and we're seeing what he's capable of. He was struggling again going into this Arizona series, but then once again, we saw what he's capable of, and he just does it in so many different aspects. And you talked about the home runs, but these are not those, as we used to call, Lucas Duda meaningless home runs. I mean, a lot of the times when Francisco Alvarez is hitting them, they're go-ahead home runs, they're game-winning home runs. He's come up big, and like I like to call it, the clutch. He's definitely been clutch, especially as such a young player, a rookie. I mean, like we talked about, those kind of big moments, you either have the mentality to do it or you don't. And Francisco Alvarez has done it time and time again. And, you see him just going crazy rounded first base when he tied the game against Andrew Chafin when they're down to that last strike. He made a couple of really quality defensive plays against Arizona. I mean, my favorite one was that wild pitch where he did basically a pop-up slide to throw the runner out. I mean, that was a really nice play by Francisco. And then the other Francisco, Lindor, I mean, like you said, the 5-for-5 game, hitting home runs. He went to the opposite field against San Diego. And within the span of just this week alone, I think it's averaged up like 20 points. So, I mean, it was a massive week for him. OPS now at around 800. Definitely worthy of an all-star. I mean, the guy right now, with the kind of week that he had, he's on a very nice pace to hit 30 home runs. Not something you see from shortstops at all. So it definitely has been, like we said, a weird year for Lindor so far. But I think then with the totality of what he's doing, especially with this week that he just had, he's definitely been a very productive player. I mean, he still has the really good WAR. He's still around top 10 in there. So he still is one of those elite players in all of Major League Baseball. So it was good to see those guys stepping up. Pete Alonso, he had one really nice home run, but he still has been struggling ever since coming back off that injury list. We saw Marte hit the big home run, but then some of the other things that we don't like is Tommy Pham leaving the game against San Diego. That's a guy who he had a rough West Coast stretch, but obviously before that he was one of the Mets' only productive players. So you hope there's nothing too serious going on there. But again, I mean, when you just see that they weren't able to do too much, and for me, I was pretty disappointed with the lineup that they rolled out there in this last game, before the All-Star break. You're going to have a long period of time off, and you have guys like Guillorme in the lineup and guys like DJ Stewart in the lineup. And it's like, if you're trying to get back in the wild card race, these guys can't be making starts for you. I mean, Luis Guillorme, he had, just this double play that was just Bruno Guillorme, ground ball heavy, so slow. I mean, the guy just can't beat out anything. And it's just like you have so many guys, and then you put them right behind Beatty, who's another heavy ground ball guy. I mean, it's just like we've said many times, the way they've constructed this lineup, you just feel that, when you are going against the really good pitchers of the Blake Snell, of the Joe Musgrove, you need the big hits, and you got to do it. And you saw how the Padres won the last game of the series. Home runs by Machado, capitalizing off Max Scherzer mistakes. Now, yes, Machado has really good career numbers against Max Scherzer, but when the good pitchers make those mistakes, you've got to capitalize off it, and you can't capitalize with a single. The Mets got hit like 5 times in the last game against San Diego. You can't capitalize with hit by pitches. I mean, you got to really crush it. I mean, they had plenty of opportunities. They had bases loaded. Plenty of guys running score position can't come through because when you're facing a guy like Musgrove, trying to string together 3 to 4 hits with the lack of speed this team has to score, like we've said plenty of times, a single run is not a recipe for success. It is not easy to do. So I just feel like there is still far too many guys in this lineup where it just feels that what the best thing they could give you in a plate appearance is that they're only going to give you one base. And when you string a bunch of them together, it's very hard to score runs on a consistent basis, and you don't have many threats in that lineup. And again, we've talked so much about protecting Pete Alonso. Jeff McNeil's been ice cold all year. That's not going to get it done. So I just think that, like we've talked about in the beginning, there still are a lot of those same weaknesses and flaws that definitely rear their ugly head in this series against San Diego.
From what you've seen so far this season, it was a successful trip, but it still was a lot. It was still in the same theme of stressfulness that you had throughout every single one of these games. You did get some strong pitching performances. You got some pitching performances that really, really suck. And I mean, Francisco Alvarez just proving once again that the kid's just going to be a star. I mean, we all know that this guy is just going to be one of the best catchers in all of baseball for years and years to come. Pete Alonso, I'm really hoping that whatever is going on with him, it's got to be resolved over this All-Star break, or we're going to go absolutely nowhere, especially with the small chance that we have of making the playoffs towards the second half of the season. Now, Lindor heating up, of course. I've loved his approach throughout the entire year. I've loved that he's hitting for more power. He's going for extra base hits. I don't care what he's doing with the batting average because singles do absolutely nothing in this day of age. So Francisco Lindor, red hot, been great going into the All-Star break. We'll obviously talk about the All-Star selections, but I do believe that he should be an All-Star this year. Max Scherzer on this road trip, 2 really rough starts, not dependable whatsoever. And it just continues to go with the trend of this guy has not come up big for us when we needed him to be. We saw it last year when we really, really needed him. He fell apart, and now we really need to stack up wins. He fell apart again. I mean, we'll talk about him a little bit later in terms of his future with the team, but this is not good. And I really don't like how he looks against these teams that could be big threats in the playoffs right now. And, we'll see what happens going down the line. What I didn't like, and what I haven't liked for a long time, Starling Marte looks lazy as shit out there. I don't know what's going on with this guy, but he looks so disinterested. Came up in one of those games 3 times with runners in scoring position, grounding into a double play, completely overmatched by a lot of these high leverage relievers, late on so many fastballs, can't hit a slide to save his life. I made a post about this on Twitter. Marte is making $19.5 million this year. He's been projected per his player value at $600K this year. He's been so freaking bad overall, just not even as a hitter, as a defender, as a base. And it's really starting to hurt this team. The fact that he is still above the lower third of the lineup every single time that he plays, it's absolutely ridiculous. Now, in terms of the lineup that you were just talking about, I like DJ Stewart, but I don't think he should be hitting in front of Francisco Alvarez. Like, that's ridiculous. He's a bottom third type of guy. Secondary power, third power bat, fourth power bat, fifth power bat, whatever. Beatty, as much as he has strung together a few hits here and there, talked about this for a little bit. This guy has a 70 raw power grade in his scouting report. And all it looks like he's good for is opposite field singles. And that's not going to get it done for me. I'm sorry. That's just ridiculous. So you got to pull the ball. You got to pull fly balls, and end of story. I don't see how this is going to contribute long-term if he's just going to be doing this. And he's not doing it at a good rate whatsoever. I don't need any more single hitters on this team. We hope that the power came from the prospects, and we're getting it from one, but the other one lost. Terrible 2-strike approach as well.
I think just the point with Beatty, I mean, I don't even remember the last time the guy had a home run off the top of my head. I mean, right now he's at 5 home runs for the year. Meanwhile, the other guy, Alvarez, they keep showing that stat, second most by a rookie catcher other than Johnny Bench.
Johnny freaking Bench.
You can make the case, literally the greatest catcher of all time.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
That's the pace that Alvarez is on right now. Give him a full season, and he's another guy making you 30 home runs. And again, as a catcher, it's just freaking crazy. So, I definitely love what I see. And he's the younger one, too. Like Brett Beatty had more of the, major league expectation, supposed to be a little more developed. but he had that ground ball problem in the minors, and we saw it when he first got called up. So I can't say that Brett Beatty hitting a bunch of grounders is a surprise to us. I mean, we've seen this happen before. We thought he'd made the adjustments. Does he have to make them again? I guess, but still, it's like you said. It's just that on this particular team, even if he did get it going, the way that he is actually getting his production, it's not a great fit. I mean, it's literally a carbon copy of McNeil right now. I mean, right now, Beatty's numbers, he's below average in as far as his hitting. So he's still young, but again, like you traded Escobar, you didn't really, make the trade for Matt Chapman and guys like that because Brett Beatty is your future third baseman. I mean, that's what we've been told. He's supposed to be the guy. So second half of the season, I like to see him finish it strong. I want to feel a little more encouraged and a little more confident that okay, yes, Brett Beatty is our third baseman. Because if his second half looks like his first half, and you know what, Matt Chapman is available in free agency, we are a win now team. It's something you have to consider. I mean, and even if you want to, we know how desperate this team needs pitching. If you need to trade Beatty for a nice young arm or two, it's something you have to consider because again, like I mean, if McNeil's going to be here for 5 years, and we've seen Nimmo tap into the power, which I'm glad, but again, just so many of these type of hitters in the lineup already, and we know that you just can't. It's not a good player in this modern era to have that play style. And when you already have so many, it just makes it even tougher.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen some minor league people talking about how they're talking about like style of play and saying and responding to the fact that of him not pulling fly balls, and they're saying, oh, well, that's just not his thing. All right, well, that's not going to work. That's not going to work then. Like, you're telling me he stinks then. Like, at the end of the day, when he came in here, when he was called up earlier this year, he was doing it. He was pulling fly balls. He was quick to the ball.
First at bat against Atlanta was a perfect pull, and it was a wonderful shot. Like, oh my gosh, here we go. And then we never saw that again. I mean, we had one. I think he had the other one. I think it was last year as well. He had a really nice pull. But other than that, I mean, you're looking at a guy who, I mean, he had a home run June 29th. He had another home run. I think it was in the middle of May. Like it's once a month at this rate. Like you're looking at a guy that he is even going to crack double digits.
And you're seeing here with the power, like, yeah, opposite field home runs happen. Those are a thing, but they don't happen consistently. That's not a thing that happens, especially in this game. Opposite field homers, that's not something that you want to see. You don't want to swing late. That's just stupid. I use this analogy all the time. A bunch of free gifts at a party. Would you want to arrive later, or would you rather arrive early? Like, you have to swing early in order to generate the most power with the most barrel window, and he's just not doing that. So I don't like this whatsoever.
We're not even seeing, I mean, we could, really get caught up in the home runs, but you're not seeing doubles, you're not seeing triples. And he's not a guy that if he's going to be a one base player, singles, walks, he doesn't steal bases to make it or, go first to third or be able to really make up for it and have these redeeming qualities. And we all know he's not an offensive stalwart at third base. So, I mean, I need to see something because we know that, like you said, he has the raw power grade. He has, the frame to do it. But it's just actually translating that we haven't seen it on a consistent basis.
I mean, there's a reason why you're not seeing the extra base hits. It's because the majority of extra base hits come from pulling the ball.
And with a 50% ground ball rate, you can only get so many extra. You can't hit a home run on the ground.
An extra base hit is an extra base hit, whether it is a double or a triple, or most of that comes from pulling the ball. I'm not saying that there's not a single opposite field base hit that has ever happened before, but it's basically like in basketball, a high percentage shot. It's the best way to do it. And he's not doing that. So I'm okay with if he wanted to be use the whole field type of thing, but he needs to be pro pull. You have to swing early. It just has to happen. And we just need that type of power from whether it's the bottom of the lineup or the top of the lineup. I mean, I don't know what to say, but I mean, a lot of these guys.
There's nothing coming from that bottom besides Alvarez. And I mean, they finally batted him 8th, and that feels like a miracle compared to how often he's batting 9th. So, I mean, I just don't understand. And that's the thing that Buck Shoulder, he used it early in the year. Well, he's doing good there. I mean, okay, he could do good a higher part of the lineup because it makes no sense if you have your best hitters at the top, They got a bunch of okay guys. Then you have one great guy and a bunch of bad guys. I mean,
Next day he
how's he
puts
going to
him in
drive
the
any
two hole.
win?
He homers in Colorado or what.
Yeah, then he goes right back to the Bobby order. I
Yeah,
mean,
I don't know. He
it's
doesn't even
just it
have
doesn't
a
make sense.
official spot there. I mean, that's a whole other conversation. But you need power in this game, and if you're not going to supply it, I mean, I don't know. I mean, we definitely saw a lack of power at the beginning of Brett Beatty's minor league career. I'm hoping that we have some kind of adjustment here. But if the excuse for him using the opposite field all the time, just being this is just how he is, it's not going to work. It is not going to work.
I'll tell you what. I mean, you look at what Ronnie is doing in the minor leagues right now. His play style is a much better fit for what
It
this Mets
is.
team needs. A lot more athletic, pulling the ball, and again, you always love a switch hitter. And unfortunately, he hasn't really been playing third base. He's been still at shortstop and things like that. So the actual position is not quite there yet. But as far as lineup fit, Borussia is the better fit right now for what this team.
Then there's obviously another thing that I just want to add here, and then we'll move on. But Tommy Pham going down, obviously, in today's game, it's a possibility that maybe opens the window if he is out for a certain period of time. Maybe that does open the window again for Mark Vientos being called up for the second half. But I mean, I highly doubt he's even going to play at this rate. But
Yeah, and if anything, he would what would happen is that Mark Canna would become the full time left fielder again, and the only time you see him Mark Vanson would again be against lefties, DHing, because right now your whole bench options are Vogelback left-handed, Gurright left-handed, DJ Stewart left-handed, so and then you have your other catcher. So I mean, Nomar Vise also left-handed. So your only opportunities is DHing only against lefties, which obviously not as frequent as right-handed pitchers. Vogelback still batting right after P. Alonso. Had a couple of okay games, but still, for the most part, it has really been lackluster. And again, another one of these guys, one base player. I mean, it's similar like Brett Beatty. Vogelback hits the ball on the ground a ton. Like we have so many of that same type of player that it's hard to watch.
We'll see what happens towards the second half of the season. Obviously, we know that the trade deadline is something that we're going to have to look out for. We'll see if they're going to be buyers or sellers. I personally just want to retool the damn roster, no matter what, whether they're in it or out of it. But I mean, we'll see what happens. But definitely not a fun first half overall. So as we said in the intro, we have reached the All-Star break, and 2 Mets will be representatives this year. Our slugging first baseman, Pete Alonso, has been selected to the All-Star game for the 3rd time in his career. This season, Alonso is slashing .215, .315, .508 with a 126 WRC plus, 26 homers, 61 runs batted in 340 plate appearances. Alonso will also participate in his 4th consecutive home run derby, where he looks to regain his crown. And the Mets' second All-Star selection was a late addition, replacing former Met Marcus Stroman, Kodai Senga. As one of the few bright spots of the Mets pitching this year, Senga has posted a 3.31 earned run average, striking out 29.5% of batters in his rookie year across 89.2 innings pitched. Senga has now become the first ever Japanese-born player in Mets history to be selected to the All-Star game.
We knew P. Alonso was kind of a no-brainer. I mean, anytime you're a guy who's right near the top as far as home runs, you're automatically on the team. And he had that crown until he got injured. And like we've said, a lot of mixed results. I mean, you'll see a home run, but then you'll see an 0 for 12, and then a home run, and then an 0 for 11. So I'm not crazy about him being in the home run derby, honestly, because like I said, I think there is something going on. He came back way faster than expected, and you can see it in the results on the field. There's no way that being in a home run derby is going to make this hand thing any better. If anything, it might make it only worse. So I understand, his crown, all that, winning home run derbies. I get it. But I think right now, if your goal is to win, your, maybe contract extension, things like that, I don't like this. I don't like him being in the home run derby with the way his hand is right now. But obviously, he is well deserving of it. And then Kodai Senga has been a guy who I think has probably been the most underrated Met all year. Because we've seen when he's not walking batters what he's capable of. And you saw it in the Arizona series. And here's a team, the Diamondbacks, who going into that series, second best record in the National League to the Atlanta Braves. The team that's in first place ahead of the Dodgers, a lot of really good young talent. And Senga was just mowing them down. And it was nice to see him finally go deep into a game because he didn't have, 4 walks, couldn't go 5 innings, 6 innings. But, all things considered, he's at that 3.35 ERA around there. And a guy who still, even though he's 30 years old, it is his rookie season. First time, like we said, major leagues, new mound, new rest regimen and all these other things. And you really like what you see. The Ghost Fork has been pretty spooky. I mean, striking out a ton of batters, has really good success with it. So I'm really happy for him. You know, a guy who's a rookie coming overseas, able to make the All Star team. That was a really nice addition. But I do think that of all the Mets, Francisco Lindor most worthy. I mean, you look at all the number ranks shortstop wise, particularly from the offense. When you look at home runs, you look at RBIs, you look at extra base hits, defense. I mean, the guy he's been stealing bases this week as well. Like, what more could he do to be worthy? And you see a guy, and no offense to him, but Pedromo making it over him made no sense. I mean, this isn't, team with better records make the team. Uh, that was kind of ridiculous to me. So Lindor was worthy. And then Brandon Nimmo. I mean, he's a guy that has been really solid all year long. OPS above 800 all year long, average in the 280s, always good OBP. We tapped into the power this past month or so. And I think that if he continues that, he's bound to make an All-Star team eventually. I think he has to. And then obviously, he makes his highlight reel catches if it's near the wall. Anything in front of him, not so much. But other than that, he's been solid all year long. He's been probably the Mets' only consistent guy the entire season. A lot of the guys have been very streaky. Right now, Nimmo's been struggling in this West Coast swing, but for the most part, he's just been so solid. Those are the two guys that I really had my eye on, hoping that they'd make the All-Star team. Other than that, everyone else has just been so bad that they really haven't earned it. Alvarez, like I put him in consideration just because I don't know if he still has it, but by the end of this week, he led all major league catchers in home runs. And again, this is not a guy that started opening day. This is not a guy who got the starting job right away. So, I mean, for him to do that, I think he's worthy as well. But, I'm glad that the two guys made it. They're deserving. But the Mets definitely could have used a couple more.
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited for Kodai Senga as I've been for the entire season. I mean, every time this guy takes the mound, I mean, I feel like it's possible I can see something great. It's not like the level of Jacob deGrom dominance yet. We'll see. I don't know, maybe in a few years. But at this point, I mean, he's looked great all season. He's had a few growing pains in his first year here, but I mean, overall, he's been great. Alonso, I mean, last year, let's not forget, going into the All-Star break last year, he had a little bit of a stretch where he wasn't hitting well. So I'm hoping that, I don't know, maybe this round of batting practice can help him out here somewhat. I'm hoping, because we need him so badly to perform if we're going to start winning consistently and make a push for the playoffs. Obviously Brandon Nimmo, I mean, as you said, I mean, you said it right there, Frank. You just said, like, he's been probably the most consistent bat all year for the Mets. I feel like that's just the deal every single year with Brandon Nimmo. And once again, the guy is snubbed of the rightful all-star selection that he should have. I mean, he should have been. This has been multiple years now that the guy should have gotten it, and he still has not gotten the consideration. But I mean, obviously, the outfield competition, it's going to grow even more as the game goes on, because there's tons of future stars that can possibly come into the National League for the outfield. But overall, I mean, he deserves it. He freaking deserves it. I mean, the guy needs to get it already.
It was finally healthy. Like I thought this was the one. This was the chance.
It seemed like that was it, and I guess it just didn't happen. But he is one of the best players in baseball to never get a selection to the All-Star game right now, in my opinion. We're talking about pitching. There really wasn't much, and I was kind of surprised that one of the second in command was somebody from our rotation, because our rotation has been a fucking mess this year. And to be honest, I wouldn't mind putting Tommy Pham in there, but he's hurt now, so whatever. So now, in terms of the Mets rotation, we have gotten an update of the eventual return of Jose Quintana. Quintana underwent surgery on his rib earlier this year, and he has began his rehab assignment about a month ago. The 34-year-old southpaw is scheduled to throw a simulated game following the All-Star break after he struggled in his most recent rehab start, stretching to 80 pitches. Quintana went 4 1/3, allowing 5 earned runs and walking 3 for AAA Syracuse on Friday. But Mets manager Buck Showalter explained that Quintana pitched through some flu-like symptoms in his latest outing, but still remains on schedule.
Again, his procedure was so unusual that you really don't know what to expect. I mean, it's not something that you really could just bounce back from. And that's been pretty evident with the way his rehab starts have gone. And really, I think the fact that he's done so many rehab starts is honestly a bad sign because they've yet to see anything solid out of him to be like, oh, he's ready. We call him up. We would still rather have David Peterson start. We would rather send down Tyler McGill than have Jose Quintana be activated. That's concerning. And I think, you know what? If you need to shut him down for longer or you need him to make more rehab starts until he's fully ready, then so be it because there's no reason to call him up if he's not going to be productive. I mean, that's just kind of pointless. I know Buck said, he had the flu-like symptoms in his last start, whatever. We still haven't seen the velo get where it was. And again, it's such a weird thing that you don't know how to evaluate it. You can't really compare it to how other guys have rehab because, again, it's not something you commonly hear about. So for me, he has the All-Star break to rest up a little more. I say keep letting him rehab, and until he is fully ready and he can actually be productive. If he's just going to come here and make things harder for the team, then, again, there's no reason to call him up. I hope he can. It is a 2-year deal, so he was supposed to be, a mid-rotation guy. He was supposed to be a pretty nice part of this team, because the Mets did lose a lot of their starting rotation last year. So he was supposed to be one of those new guys in here, and we still yet to see it. And it is definitely pretty frustrating because it seemed like a nice signing at the time, but it's such been an unfortunate circumstance that we really just don't know what to expect. I mean, we don't know if he will be able to get back to where he was because this kind of injury is such a mystery.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen quite a bit of his rehab performances so far with St. Lucie and Syracuse, and this guy might stink. I'm not going to lie, this guy might stink. Not look like the Jose Quintana from last year. I mean, this guy sitting 89 to 90 to 91 on the fastball. It looks like the only thing that he can really throw or command is his breaking stuff. I'm not feeling good about this one. And for a team and a rotation that has really lacked one thing being length, I don't think that that's going to be something that's going to be really helpful from a guy like Jose Quintana. Obviously, we did get the report that he is expected to be back, I don't know, maybe a week after the All-Star break, something like that. But I'm not really liking what I'm seeing, and hopefully that we do get some rest up with him during this All-Star break and, he can try and figure something out. But this just seems like just another Billy Epler edition that is just, I mean, it just has not contributed its price. I don't think at any point it's going to get any better because he's 34. He's not young. I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt for now. Once we get him back on the mound, we'll see. But we had a similar situation to this of a signing or an addition that came in here, and it was a mess. They were shelling himself in Carlos Carrasco after the All-Star break. So I'm not saying that this is going to be a disaster. I am definitely not saying that he's going to be a savior to this rotation, but we need somebody to go 5-6 innings every fifth day. And hopefully it could be him, but I'm not really feeling confident right now. I guess I can ask you the question because it is such a huge topic now. The shadow hovering around David Peterson with Jose Quintana since David Peterson came back from his demotion to AAA. He's actually been putting up quality outings. Would you put two lefties in the rotation, or would you just send Peterson down?
If Quintana isn't pitching well in the minor leagues, I don't know how it necessarily translates to the major leagues. And like you said, the guy is 34. I mean, we saw some bright spots with David Peterson last year, but for the most part, it's been pretty rough this year. And we've said a lot of the times we lean younger, and I think that for me, if you call up Quintana, I still want to see David Peterson get a quality run in the bullpen. I want to see it actually let them see through it because I'd rather have David Pearson come out of the bullpen than TJ McFarland. I mean, we've still seen some of these relievers that come in for the Mets are just they don't belong here. I mean, they're just not major league pitchers that the guy who, if he could, as a reliever, lean more into his slider and be a guy who could give you multiple innings out of the bullpen and be a true long reliever, which this team still doesn't have. at least he could provide some kind of value to you. And maybe as a spot starter, if the older guys need another day of rest, things like that, he's there. Because I just don't think that Quintana, like we've said before, if you haven't done it as a Met, you haven't done it. I mean, he doesn't really have the reputation where it's like, oh, we got to get him into the rotation immediately. He had the great year with St. Louis, but right before that, he was a guy who was almost out of the league. I mean, he was a guy, who was really struggling with Pittsburgh and some of the other teams he bounced around with, the Angels and things like that. So for him to all of a sudden go back to being not that good, it isn't the biggest surprise in the world. But I think that, what, if David Pearson is finally starting to figure it out a little bit, that can't do well to the guy's psyche. It can't do well, you're like, okay, I'm finally pitching well, I'm finally performing well, and then because this guy is 10 years older than me, I automatically get sent down. I mean, that'd be a pretty frustrating to happen to Peterson. So I'd actually like to see him get a long run of it in the bullpen to see if there's something there. Because again, the Mets could use some in-house arms out of that bullpen that could actually help them out because it hasn't happened.
Overall, it's a quality outings of what you've gotten the last 3 times from David Peterson. But I think he looks worse. But you know what? Maybe it's an adjustment that they did on purpose. But when your fastball is under the 2000 RPM mark and you have almost 20 inches of vertical drop on a low 90s fastball, you're going to get tattooed a lot. And I don't think that's really going to help you if you are coming out of the bullpen or if you're starting whatsoever. I mean, that just can't happen, especially from a 6'6" pitcher. So I don't know. I think you can just ride it out and see what you get from Peterson. Obviously, we don't have a full-on timetable of when Jose Quintana is going to make his first start as a Met with the big league club. So obviously, that is just going to be the biggest factor into what happens. But I mean, since he's come back, he's obviously been better. But I don't really think that says much as to compare to how he was before he was sent down, because the guy looked awful as probably the worst starting pitcher in all of baseball. I'm not expecting much, but I just hope that he kind of just adds depth to this rotation more than actual just dominance or quality, to be honest, because we're going to need it. Because I don't want to see Jose Budo making meaningful starts in August. I don't want to see Joey Lucchesi out there trying to slug through 5 innings, because we're getting to this point where every game matters and we need our pitching to perform, and we have seen it. And just like we've seen with their record of the Mets starters going 6+ innings, we need our pitching to perform. And if it's not going to happen from Jose Quintana, it's not going to happen from the back end of the rotation, we don't stand a chance whatsoever. As for more pitching, let's get to one of our so-called aces. Now, depending on how the next month goes, rumors have been starting to float around about the possibility of Max Scherzer waiving the no-trade clause in his contract. When asked about the rumors, Scherzer closed off the conversation immediately, saying that I'll comment when Steve says sell. Until then, it's pointless. It's just clickbait now. I'm here to show up to win. That's all I'm here to do. The 38-year-old starting pitcher signed a 3-year, $130 million contract last offseason that includes a year 3 player option worth over $43 million.
For me, it's still been a big disappointment from Max Scherzer. I mean, you can go recency bias or whatever, but here he is. We needed this game against the Padres. They're a team that, we had almost the same record as. We're trying to fight and get back into this race because he's been one of the reasons why we haven't gotten the job done, between his suspension and all the other excuses he's come up with. He's just getting paid so much that he still is yet to show up in the big moment. Whenever it is the biggest game, Max has not showed up in a Mets jersey. Had he done it in the past with Washington and Los Angeles? Yes. But again, if you haven't done it as a Met, then why do we pay you? You're paying Max Scherzer for what he did 10 years ago. You're not paying him for what he's done this year, what he's going to do next year. To me, even if the Mets kind of did get back in it, if I could find someone to take that contract, and because I know it's going to go even worse next year, I'd be all for it. I mean, this team needs to get younger. He hasn't shown me that he's been dominant. Even against the teams that aren't great, I still haven't just seen the Max Scherzer that I was expecting, that you paid for. You just haven't gotten it yet. So if I could, I don't think any team would take him, honestly. I don't think he's worth it right now, whether stuff, contract, all that, because you see how reluctant teams are to spend nowadays, anyways. I highly doubt anyone's going to take that. Even if the Mets had to pay off some of it, it depends what you get back. I mean, if you could actually get some quality young pieces, particularly pitchers, then yes, I mean, I'd definitely be all for it, or some actual versatile, athletic, young position players that can hit for power and things like that. Sure, I'd be willing to consider it, but I just think that even if they did kind of get back in it, we've seen this so many times before where the Mets are very mediocre. They're hovering around 500, and they just go all in for a team that is not all in caliber, and it ends up, fighting them back. So if you had a pretty good package on tip for Max Scherzer, I'd say go for it. Let him go.
It's been so frustrating this year, especially with the top of this rotation with Verlander and Scherzer, just with overall consistency. And I've gotten to a point where there's been some times where I'm like, okay, how do I get these two contracts out of here? And I've gotten really, really frustrated because we all know that they're not going to be here long term. It's a win now move, and they're not winning with them on the mound, and they're not helping. They're making it more difficult for this team to win. And I'm not seeing the Max Scherzer that we supposedly paid for. Now, we'll see what Scherzer does because obviously he needs to waive it himself. There's obviously going to be some stipulations of how the Mets go about this, but it's hard because he needs to perform in order for him to have value. And then also the Mets will still have to take on a chunk of the contract. Obviously, it's a player option, so I don't think they would have to cover much, but I feel like I don't think they would have to cover the third year, or maybe they'll cover a little bit of it. Obviously, Steve Cohen has said that I'm willing to cover some of these contracts to get these young pieces in return and improve this farm system. And if there is a possibility to do that, I don't see this team completely turning it around before the trade deadline where they're in full on position of where I know they're going to make a move for this last playoff spot. They're going to make a move for the wild card. So at this point, still 6 games under 500. You're at the All-Star break. You have a few more weeks to the trade deadline. I'm definitely considering it if he gives you the green light to do so. And it all depends on what their current situation is. Right now, I'm at retool mode, obviously, swapping in a few pieces and bringing in some MLB-ready guys. But if they continue to fall and they don't seem to be in position, there's a lot of pieces I would sell off. And Max Scherzer is a huge piece to that I would 100% put on the trade market right now. I obviously would also get rid of Verlander too, because I think he's been absolutely useless overall, but I don't think that's going to happen. But as for Max Scherzer, if there's an opportunity to do it, I'm not saying he's 100% Jacob deGrom level untouchable. He has not been good this year overall. He has not performed for us. At some point, we might have to come to the realization that we need to send him to a team that is competing right now, and he could possibly perform for them. Because even though it's a short-term deal, it definitely blocks out a lot of things on this team in terms of pitching. Like we've said, talking about how top-heavy they made this rotation of this supposed two-headed monster. I'd like to have more rotation depth than have two veteran pieces who are on the decline in their career at the top of my rotation, making a combined $87 million.
When it comes to Max Scherzer and when it comes to Justin Verlander and the contracts that they're making, it becomes particularly evident in draft season where you see how bad the Mets farm system is, and they're only making it worse by being so far over the tax that their draft picks are all jacked up. So, we talked about the very top heavy in the farm system. They already need more work, but then I don't want to say purposely, but they're also making it worse by constantly doing this. So to me, like I said, if I could offload some contract and get like young quality, but this team just needs, like you said, a whole retool. It needs a lot of things moved around and changed. You need to get younger. I mean, we've seen the best teams in the league right now. They're all young. All of them. I mean, you look across the board, they're not paying $400 million for a bunch of old guys that don't belong in this modern era of baseball with all these new rule changes. So, I mean, that's why I'm just looking at the draft right now, and you're just waiting, like, When does my team get to go? Oh, wait, I can't because I gave all my money to Justin Verlander and Max Scherzer. It's just foolish. I mean, they're hurting themselves in more ways than one at this point. And what concerns me is that it's not just a this year problem. It's an even bigger problem next year when the both of them are older and even worse. So that's why I'm like, if I could do it now, I'm all for it.
Benefit of the doubt, it all comes down to good scouting with drafting, obviously. And, draft slot doesn't really matter. I mean, you can find gems in any part of the draft. But the fact that, we're moving down 10 slots and it has not really worked out, it hasn't been worth it to do that, especially with a team that is lacking a lot of youth, a lot of talent in the farm system where it's top heavy. It's a decent top 10, but it needs to get deeper. And at this point, picking from 32 instead of 22, I mean, that's definitely a big jump for a team that's underperforming with the high payroll that you have right now. And that starts with the top of that payroll with Max Scherzer and Justin Verlander making a combined $87 million. So last week, the Mets hosted the Giants at Citi Field, and they welcomed back quite a few familiar faces, including Michael Conforto, Wilmer Flores, and J.D. Davis. Reflecting on his time in Queens, Davis had some interesting words, to say the least, on his experience with the Mets. In 2022, I was one of the only hitters where if I were to hit a home run, I wouldn't be in the lineup the next day or the following day. It would just feel like I was playing every 3, 4, 5 days. It was almost like if I were to go up and get an at-bat for the first time in 3 to 4 days, it was more or so, I'm not even trying to get a hit. I'm just trying to be on time right now. I'm just trying to be in survival mode. The now 30-year-old J.D. Davis was sent to San Francisco along with 3 minor league arms for Darren Ruff at last year's trade deadline.
I'm glad that JD said it because it just proves what we've been saying all along and how we felt all along. And JD Davis is the perfect example of it. And I think what happened with JD Davis is the same thing that could happen with Mark Vientos, who's a guy that you've made a lot of comparisons to as far as their play style. And it was very evident when JD Davis first got here, 2019, when he was a part-time player, he was a utility guy, kind of playing every couple of days, things like that. Wasn't very successful. But then all of a sudden, once he got that everyday playing time, he turned to be a really solid player. And we saw that time and time again. The Mets, for whatever reason, they picked, once again, all these older guys above him. Robinson Cano, Dominic Smith. I mean, they just had so many other guys who played over JD Davis that he became this part-time player, a guy who didn't get consistent playing time. And then, like he said, he finds us something good and he goes back on the bench for a couple days. And that's the same exact thing we're seeing happen with Mark Vientos. Now you get to go elsewhere, less pressure. You can just be yourself and get momentum, get rhythm, and all of a sudden you're becoming a really solid player. And we say it all the time. You see it time and time again with guys who they were good, comes to Mets, not so good, leave, they become good again. I mean, it just happens time and time again. And it's like, he makes it so obvious. He said it to the whole world. And you still do the same stuff with a guy like Mark Vientos. And it's just like, how many more times do we have to do this? And then you also lost a young piece in Carson, more things like that for Darren Ruff. I mean, it's still crazy to me that the Mets got rid of young pieces on a already veteran team to get a 38-year-old guy who didn't even make it to the second year of his contract. I mean, it's crazy to me that they do like just these mistakes that you should never even think of. I mean, there's just no way where you're a team and you're trying to, we say asset management, things like that. You say, you know what? Let me get rid of a piece for a guy who's 10 years older. You never should be actively pursuing guys who are above age 37 because they only get worse from there. I mean, and they do it consistently over and over and over again, and it never works, but they keep doing it and they won't just admit to their mistakes, and they keep making the same mistakes, and it just becomes so frustrating as a fan. And JD Davis, he just made it so obvious because it's like you see it happening all over again. And I would hate for Mark Vientos to end up getting traded because there's been no playing time for him on the team, and it becomes a productive power hitter which the team could desperately need. So it's just been very frustrating that, like what he said, we've seen it, we saw it coming, and it happened. and it still happened.
The age-old story of someone leaves the Mets, gets out of here, and then all of a sudden they're an amazing player. The Justin Turners of the world. I mean, Daniel Murphy was good here, but he was even better when he left. And now JD Davis, I mean, he's having a really good season in San Francisco as well. So we've all come to see that in these last few years that it's not really just the players that the Mets have. The problem is the Mets and not really the players overall, which they have not been able to tap into with the poor player development. Now, as for JD Davis, I don't think he did himself any favors when he's here, because I don't remember him hitting many home runs post that 2019 season that he had. I think it was more of him. I mean, we all know that he still can't hit a fastball to save his life. He did not pull the ball at all when he was here. So he definitely did not make his case well, but we all know the effects of every day to half day reps. I mean, if you play every day, you get the experience, you have a better chance of succeeding at the major league level. And we're seeing the exact same thing with Mark Vientos right now, who is kind of a similar player to JD Davis. There is a lot of swing and miss. There is a lot of frustration, but there's a lot of power upside. Right now, it's even been worse, where Mark Vientos isn't even hanging around right now. He's in the minor leagues. He's going to break the AAA home run record. It's a perfect example of what happened with JD Davis. I wasn't the biggest fan of JD Davis, but I do know that overall, he is a good hitter. I know he is a good hitter at his best. There was a lot of frustrating things that went on with JD Davis. We all know that he had to go. He needed a new place of scenery at the trade deadline. He should have been moved a lot earlier. Do I think that he's lying when it comes to this whole situation? No, absolutely not. We've seen this so many times with so many other players. 100%. I'm not surprised whatsoever at all that this happened with JD Davis. And we all know that he was going to be a good hitter wherever he wound up, and he was going to, start figuring it out again if he played every day, until they actually do go into the offensive style that is made for 2023 and beyond. This is going to continue to be a problem. We've seen tons of teams have great hitting development. Recently, we all know the Dodgers do it well. The Rangers have really developed hitting very well in the last few years. I mean, hopefully the Mets eventually could be one of those teams, and I'm hoping it is, because we do have a lot of top-heavy talent, especially offensively, and position players that could be good. And I just want to see them reach that full potential with the Mets and not somewhere else. So with the Mets back, but not completely back, the decision whether to buy or sell at the trade deadline is still up in the air, because we're a few weeks away from that. I want to talk about the buyer's market today and talk about some areas to address, and some options that are possibly available. Now, in his press conference a few weeks ago, Steve Cohen talked about the eventual approach at the deadline, and he said that if I'm in this current position, I'm not adding. I think it would be pretty silly. I would probably do very little. So it obviously has a lot more to do with the performance and the current state of the team at the trade deadline, pivotal stage. I mean, are there any pieces off the top of your head that you would go after that could be moved at the deadline and the Mets should pick up?
I mean, here's a guy who I looked at last year during the trade deadline. I looked at him at the offseason, and he's a guy I still want. I think he's still a really good fit for this team, and the team should move him because, again, they're just not a smart organization. Ian Happ. I still think he's a good fit for this team. This team still desperately needs outfielders. I mean, we've seen, like we talked about, Starling Marte. He's just not living up to expectations. Tommy Pham, he might be moved at the deadline. I mean, he's a guy that he's on the 1-year deal. Mark Canha is another guy. He's probably gone after this year. And like we've said, there's nothing on the horizon as far as outfielders. There's none coming anytime soon. The next is Alex Ramirez, who's still a couple years away. So it's going to be a problem again going forward. And I think a guy like Ian Happ would be a nice fit, because here's a guy who's a switch hitter, hits the ball in the air. He's a little athletic. I mean, he just fits a lot of things that this team could use. And Chicago's a team that, once again, not winning games, because the Mets are in this position where if they're going to make a trade, they're battling so many other teams that I don't see these other teams be willing to help the Mets. It's not like they could make a trade with the Padres. They can make a trade with the Giants, the team that they're chasing. All these other teams are winning, so they're not going to help you out. So you're looking at very few teams. So you're looking at a team like the Cubs. You're maybe calling the White Sox because they had a couple guys that we were looking at during the offseason. Maybe looking at some of those guys. But other than that, a lot of these teams are, having winning records. Teams like Boston, you're not going to talk to. And then other teams like the Royals, it's like, do they have much to even offer you? I mean, they've only won 26 games for a reason because they don't have many good players. So it's not like you really want any of that on your team as well. So Ian Happ is the guy that I really look at because I think this team needs the most help in the outfield, other than obviously pitching, both in the rotation and in the bullpen. I would love to get another outfielder on this organization.
Let me burst the bubble. I'm sorry. Before opening day, Hap signed an extension with the Cubs, 3 years, $61 million.
That's fine. That's good because that's still a quality. That's still a deal.
Same AAV as Nimmo. I don't know.
Yeah, but it's much shorter term. I mean, that's the thing we talked about with Nimmo is that it's 8 years. Half 3 years. Again, this team needs an outfielder for a few years at a quality number. You're not going to get that in the open market. So I mean, to me, even with the extension, doesn't bother me. I still think he's a guy that could fit this team. And again, someone who could actually maybe get moved because the Cubs year after year just aren't any good.
If there is a certain point where they are buying and we are talking about outfielders, there is also another one. He plays on the south side that I would love, that being Luis Robert, who could possibly be available. He has, you're going to have to give up a lot of pieces for that. Eloy Jimenez, I mean, I've always liked him, but he's been struggling a little bit. But his contract is like, it's heaven. It's pretty much heaven. I haven't really been looking at much position players. I've kind of been just looking at pitching. And I mean, you did mention Boston of like somebody that we would not talk to possibly. I know that Boston has a lot of pitching prospects in their minor leagues that they would love to bring up. And they also have an expiring free agent. It's someone who has been fantastic. Fastball velocity has been up. James Paxton has been fantastic this year overall. I would love to add him to this rotation. But I feel like the Mets are going to, especially with the starting rotation, past the Max Scherzer and Verlander, I don't know if they want to add to a more expensive part of this team. I feel like the bullpen is going to be the most pitching that they do address at the deadline. If they are buying, I feel like they're just going to treat Jose Quintana like the trade deadline acquisition. And that's just kind of what they're going to do because we have a bare minimum GM in the office. So who would have known? But you never know. It's a few weeks away.
I mean, Ryan McMahon is a guy I really have circled. He would be so perfect for this team. Lefty, plays all over the infield. Good power. I mean, really nice swing. He's someone I'd love to get on this team. And again, Colorado, you might be able to fleece them. They're pretty dumb. Randall Grichuk is another outfielder who could actually hit the ball pretty hard. So again, they're a team that's probably be willing to sell. You would hope, but then again, they tend to do some weird stuff. So those are a couple of guys I'd definitely be looking at.
Yeah, Ryan McMahon would be a decent pickup. I would also obviously get on the phone with Cleveland, see if they're willing to move a young arm or two. I'm not really interested in Shane Bieber, to be honest.
I mean, that was like I forget what video I said that, but it was like you take any of them, Quantrell. I mean, whoever they just have so many arms. Take any of them if they're willing to move them, because Cleveland just puts out arm after arm.
I don't think they're going to go after many bats either way. I think they might just like add somebody to the bench, maybe some kind of utility piece. And I don't think they're going to go full on strong with it. I think they're going to
like Eduardo Escobar.
Yeah, it's Eduardo Escobar, exactly. If they are going to be in the winning position, they're going to have to win a lot. So I think that the buyer's market, obviously, we're just touching it up on it. Obviously, we're going to have tons of other different content on it, but I just want to say that at this pivotal stage of the year, since we're smack dab right in the middle at the All-Star break, if they are going to get back into this race, then they're going to need some reinforcements. This team definitely is not perfect. It is far from perfect. No 6-game winning streak is going to tell me otherwise.
I'm not really so much looking at this year. I'm looking at going forward because, like we said, this year is kind of a wash. And something like I was saying before, outfield is not been a problem this year. It's going to be a problem going forward. Pitching is going to be a problem going forward. So, they really should be looking at guys who have like a little bit of team control, who, maybe they're like upper 20s, low 30s that on a team that's not too good, that they could actually be meaningful contributors for a couple years to go. Because if you're just getting like a guy like Paxton, yes, he'd help the team, but he's a guy that, like you said, very old rotation. What does he do for you next year? You know what I mean? Like maybe he gets you back in the race a little bit, but I just don't think that it solves the overall problems that this team is going to have
Yeah, and that's the thing with Paxton. Obviously, he's a pending free agent after this year, and that's why I feel like they would try and get that contract off of the books.
But with Boston having a better record, it's like, what they
True.
even do?
I don't know.
I mean, they're one game behind the Yankees right now.
I feel like if you dangle
I don't see
somebody
them
in front of them, they will take him.
and that scares me. That would be a young piece, and it's like, do we do young piece for a rental for a Mets team that is so mediocre?
Again, they're going to have to just get into a winning position and get on a huge hot streak, obviously. And, they showed signs of it this last week, but they fell a little bit back into the pit again, losing 2 straight. So it's obviously going to be it's obviously just going to talk about the current position that they are in at the trade deadline. But, there definitely is some pieces that you do need to look at, obviously, because we all know they're going to need pitching help no matter what, because I don't see this completely flipping over from its ugly head just, overnight. We get a week off in the All-Star break, and all of a sudden this team's elite again. Everyone's favorite segment, Studs and Duds. It's been about 3 weeks since we've done the last episode of the podcast, so we've had a lot of sample to look at, but I guess we'll just keep it towards the last of the week. We'll start with Studs. What do you got?
Yeah, I mean, this is it's between 2 guys. They both share the same name, but I gotta go with my guy, Francisco Alvarez. Like we touched on earlier, what a week. I mean, he definitely needed to get another hot stretch going. And it's like when this guy gets hot, he hits them in bunches. I mean, he's a guy that can hit you a home run. What was it like, 4 out of 5 games or something like that? I mean, and again, like the home run hits are just so huge. The one against Chafin was the most impressive. I mean, he went with that pitch, took it to the opposite field, down to the last strike, a 1-0 game. So I really love to see that. And then Arizona ends up hitting him, and then he's giving death stares and things like that. Bench is clear. So he's just a really exciting player. I'm so glad the Mets have him because he's such a rare commodity. I mean, we talk about all the different graveyards that we've had, and catcher's graveyard was probably the biggest. And here's a guy that he's given you like the best offensive power production of any catcher in all of Major League Baseball at a rookie, and he's giving you good defense. I mean, we heard all these criticisms. Oh, not ready. Defense isn't good enough. Oh, he's just all this other stuff. And the guy's been really solid defensively. Good framing, strong arm, blocks pitches. I mean, he's starting to learn to take the mask off. I mean, he keeps improving. That's what I've always loved about this kid. That's been, just the MO about him, is that if he spots a weakness in a game, he's aware of the criticisms that are out there about him and works to get better. So I love a player like that who's always trying to improve. He was the number 1 prospect in baseball. He's got generational power. You could just sit back and rely on that, be like, I'm good. Like, how much is this kid worth? I mean, the contract that he could get at the start he's off to, there ain't many Francisco Alvarez out there right now, and he's so young that, I would just be doing, even right now, I'd be willing to sign to a massive deal just to get it done, just so we don't have to stress about it. Because I want this guy in MSU uniform for a long time, because there is that, homegrown aspect, and he's a guy that, we've been waiting for. We've been watching as he was developing. We're like, man, we can't wait till he gets here. And he's here, and he's just so awesome and I love it. Yeah, I feel like he's been one of the very, very few bright spots in this really tough season that, we saw, what this kid is capable of. And he's off to a great start of his career, and I just pray he stays healthy because I want to see it through. I want to see him have a legendary career.
That's my biggest thing with him, is I do want him to stay healthy, because we've seen a lot of ding-ups with him so far in this short amount of time that he's been here.
I mean, even the last game of the series gets hit on the knee, and he was like kind of hobbling. He stayed in.
Yeah, that's the thing. I almost cried when that happened. I was like, okay, final out of the goddamn first half, and you're telling me we got to deal with this ding-up now. So... But no, he stayed in the game. I mean, we'll see if he'll be able to do that as he gets a little bit older. Probably not, but he is a catcher. This is a position that you don't see this type of offense from, and it's a special thing. And we talked about him with giving him an extension right now. Do it. Fucking do it. I mean, you got a few days off, Billy Epler. You're not watching any games. Go ahead, get it done. I mean, 8 years, 80 million. Go ahead, do it. I mean, I'm fine with that. Buy out the arbitration years right now. You know that he is a huge factor to this lineup already. My stud, I'm going to take the other Francisco. Lindor has been fantastic recently. Overall, all year, I loved what his approach is. I really think that he's fit this new era of baseball, of pulling the ball, high exit velocity, swinging early. And he's doing it from both sides of the plate, which is great, where he has that same approach from both sides. Now, I will say that this type of approach, especially from somebody like Francisco Lindor, a lot of frustrating stretches from it. It's going to happen. You will have a lot of painful stretches. But I don't really think that is a problem because it's always been a thing with Francisco Lindor. When he's hot, he's hot. But when he is hot, I would like him to be hitting extra base hits and not just singles, walking, showing great plate discipline, passing the baton to the next guy. No, you are $340 million guy. I need to see you hitting home runs. I need you to see the big hits. I need to see the big performance. That's what I want to see from him when he is hot. He's an inconsistent hitter. We've seen this for a long time. I think we know his MO at this point. I don't give a shit about the batting average right now. Give me the big hits when it matters. Come through when we need you. And that's what he's done recently. And he's definitely my stud of the week. Stud of the last month, too. He's been red hot ever since the birth of his second daughter.
Actually, new hair, new Lindor.
All right. What about the duds?
There's a lot of guys to pick from here. I mean, we had a lot of guys who had some rough weeks, but I'm going to go, again, recency bias, but I think that based off expectations, contract, Max Scherzer is the guy. I mean, even the start against Arizona, you gave up 4 runs. Carrasco pitched better than you. Kodai Senga pitched better than you in that Arizona series. And then you know how bad we needed this game against the Padres. You know this is a team that we're, like I said before, battling with elimination the wild card and all that. You didn't show up last time, and you still don't show up today. Manny Machado still owns you. You put the team in a hole 3-0. We know how bad this team is in the first inning. And he couldn't get it done. I mean, this was just yet again another absolutely unacceptable performance from Max Scherzer. Because you know what? I could rip how bad Luis Guillorme was all week, but he's getting paid nothing. I expect nothing out of him. Brett Beatty, we already discussed him plenty. Didn't play well. Like Mark Hanna, Marte, McNeil. Like I could talk about all these guys who didn't play well this week, but all of them combined make what Max Scherzer makes. So it's like the bar for you is just like this can't happen. And it happens far too frequently. Every time it's a big spot, he just doesn't show up. So I just think that if this team, like, they purposely have this very top-heavy roster, this very top-heavy rotation. They built everything around this 1-2 punch of Verlander and Scherzer. Like, everything that's wrong with the team is because they gave everything to those guys, and they just don't show up. So, again, it's that trickle-down effect of because they don't show up and you let all these other things go by the wayside, it just makes everything look awful. And it's how you end up under 500 and behind all these teams in this position right now of the season.
I mean, we've seen the post-game interviews of Max Scherzer where he just says, no, I just have to be better. There's no excuse. Well, you got to show it at this point. I mean, you got to show it. I mean, it's $43 million at this point. I can't really break down what's going wrong for Scherzer. You're getting paid for $43 million. There is no excuse. You have to perform. It's just end of story. Like, and if you don't, then you're going to get a sour reaction because he is at the top of this payroll, tied with somebody else who's also not performing well. So, I mean, it's go time. We need you on this fucking mound right now performing, and you're not performing. And you also, the latest taste in our mouth is against the team that freaking destroyed you when we needed you the most. So the fact that we're seeing just a full-on mirror of that from last year, I mean, where's the big game pitcher that we just gave $43 million to? Because I'm not seeing it whatsoever. My dud is someone who isn't even with the team right now. They're in Syracuse recently because he just had a awful stretch, that being Jeff Brig. I think starting off the year, I think that he looked fantastic overall as a middle reliever, locking something down, with the bullpen being a complete disaster overall. Control looks really bad, and that's got to be fixed. The whole debacle in Philadelphia, that was an entire mess. And then I think that pretty much just opened the floodgates as to every single time that he came out there. And it's been a mess recently. He's had a bad stretch. I don't think he's a bad pitcher overall, but I think that he eventually will get another chance, and I think he should get another chance. But we'll see what happens with him because, again, he's another one of the flexible, optional arms that Epler praised so much about with this bullpen, that they had this whole 4-man back end. It's now 3 with no Diaz. So we're going to have to see one of these arms step up and one of them stick. And Brigham was sticking for a little bit. Recently, he kind of fell off, and they did send him down.
You talked extensively about the bullpen. I'm like, oh, the Mets got some young pieces finally. You got your Ridings and your William Woods and your Brigham and all these other arms. And yet, we lost Taylor Saucedo for Tommy Pham and one quality lefty that, of course, Seattle took another Met, whatever. They made him better. Paul Sewell, hello. So I just think that they added all these arms, and yet none of them has stuck so far. Has there been injuries? Sure. But still, it's like we've talked so much about Epler. It's like, where is it? Where's the Mets just out of nowhere breakout guy? Still haven't seen it. I mean, and we see it with just all these organizations all over. They have plenty of guys. And the Mets still can't seem to find it. And whether that's, like I've said before, whether that's the GM, the manager, the front office, the development in the minor leagues, all these things, they just don't do it. They just don't develop guys who have something, some kind of plus stuff, have something to build on. They never build on it. And it's frustrating when you make all these moves and none of them are quality.
The rapid fire stories for this week. The Mets made a trade with the Mariners, acquiring Trevor Gott and Chris Flexen for the recently DFA'd left-handed pitcher Zach Muckenhirn. The Mets DFA'd Flexen immediately after, covering the remaining $4 million on his contract to acquire Gott. In corresponding moves, the Mets have optioned Jeff Brigham, AAA Syracuse, and have designated Denyi Reyes for assignment. The 31-year-old Brigham has thrown 29.2 innings out of the Mets bullpen this year, and Denyi Reyes has cleared waivers and was outrighted to AAA Syracuse. Earlier this week, outfielder DJ Stewart joined the Mets in Arizona as the Mets optioned utility player Danny Mendick to AAA Syracuse as the corresponding move. Stewart signed a minor league contract with the Mets over the offseason and has slugged 16 home runs in 229 plate appearances for AAA Syracuse. The Mets have activated right-handed pitcher Eliezer Hernandez and optioned him to AAA Syracuse. Hernandez has been on the 60-day injured list with a shoulder injury since the beginning of the season. Tommy Pham left yesterday's game in the first inning with right groin soreness and has been reported that he will undergo imaging in New York over the All-Star break. Parting words for episode number 24, the Robinson Cano episode. Been waiting to say that for a while. Well, Willie Mays now. It's retired for him.
Now we have the All-Star break. One of the things that they were talking about during the broadcast is, having guys like Brandon Nimmo getting a bit of a breather. A guy who's been playing, a whole bunch of games lately, no days off. And I'm hoping that this long stretch of games that, maybe Nimmo breaks out of this slump, or maybe Lindor finds consistency because he never takes a day off. I know people has a home run derby, but I just hope that some of these guys who have been struggling, guys like Marte, Beatty, that we see them get it going, because Alvarez, Lindor, Alonso, these guys, they can only do so much. I mean, it's time for some of these other guys to have big second halves. I'm looking at Jeff McNeil. I'm looking at Starling Marte, guys who were all-stars last year when we're talking about, all-star season. I'm looking at Brett Beatty, guys in the future games. Like, I'm looking for these guys to take this time to, kind of refresh, get their minds right, get rested up, get healthy, and have a big second half. Because with how far a hole that the Mets have dug themselves because of these bad performances from these players, they got to make up for it. They really got to have some strong second halves. And, like we say, it's all about how you finish. Because, like I said, Lindor, Alvarez, even Alonso to an extent, Nimmo, they can only do so much. They need some help from everybody else on this team. You hope that the Tommy Pham injury isn't serious and he could get hot again, because he was basically lightning in a bottle, because he's definitely outperformed expectations and has tried to kind of cover up so many of these other guys playing so poorly. So, I mean, that's really what I'm looking at the most.
It's the All-Star break, and that means it's a break from the Mets, and I need it. I definitely need it. 80-plus games have not been fun overall. It's definitely been very stressful. A lot of holes on this team that, we talked about a lot, but you know what? Who the hell knows? We don't know where this season is going to take us throughout the second half, but hopefully it is a fun ride and not as torturous. But this is the Mets we're talking about, so I freaking doubt it. We're just looking for a better second half, of course. We also have the draft going this week, and I'm going to have some draft content out after the whole draft is done of the Mets selections, going over everybody, reviewing everybody, maybe some comparisons, whatever. I haven't really mapped it out completely yet, but other than that, we'll see you guys next week. Content throughout the week, trade deadline stuff, again, draft stuff. And we'll see you guys next time. Let's go Mets. And enjoy the All-Star break for those of you watching and listening. We'll see you guys.